Laurie Chandler.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for that introduction. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yep.
If you can at any point, please let me know. And I just want to say before I start that I do welcome questions as I go along. If they're short, I'll try to repeat them and then answer them. And that helps me to continue to talk about what you're interested in hearing about. And if we don't do it that way, we'll have questions and answers at the end. A huge thank you to Scanumfa Library and Sharon in particular, for inviting me. I've been coming to Chats with Champions for a long time, and Scanumfa's been my library since we moved here, as Sharon said, 15 years ago. And my children and I started almost right away volunteering in the children's department here on Thursday nights. And so this was one of our first homes in the community. And so this is just a very special opportunity for me to come and talk to you about this adventure that was definitely the biggest expedition and the biggest undertaking that I've ever done in my life. So this is the northern forest, some 30 million acres altogether, and we think of spruce fir forests with some pines, some birch, some maples mixed in. We think of the wildlife. We might think of wild rivers, but we don't always think of some of the other landscapes that I crossed. There's also a lot of agricultural land, some really beautiful valleys filled with old barns with mountains in the background. There's wetlands, there's wildlife refuges, and going across this whole area in one integrated journey was just an amazing way to see New England, and I feel really blessed to have been able to do that. And one of my purposes for writing about the journey, which I knew I was going to do before I even started, was to try to share this trail and this experience and opportunity with a greater number of people. So this is the trail itself. It's the longest mapped inland paddling trail in the United States, 740 miles long. And you can see it also takes a brief little journey up into Quebec, and I'll show you some pictures of how you do that when we get there. One of the biggest challenges is that there are a lot of upstream sections. If you're going to try to thru-paddle and do the entire trail as one journey, and you start in the west at Old Forge and go to Fort Kent, you face about 150 miles of upstream paddling. And if you try to do it in the other direction, which I'll show you in a minute, was just done for the first time last month, there's even more upstream. And early on in this series of talks, somebody suggested that I put arrows on there to show you where those challenging upstream sections are, so you can see them there. The route of the trail itself is very carefully researched and based on native travel routes of the Iroquois and the Wabanaki. And all that work was done back in the 1990s. The first person thru-paddled the trail in 2000, and it was dedicated, and the maps came out, which I'll talk a little bit about them in a minute. They came out in 2006. So the trail is really relatively new, and people are still just discovering it. The organization that stewards the trail keeps an official thru-paddler list, and to get your name on that, you actually go through an application process. And it's really, really helpful, even if you're not going to write a book, because you end up with this log where you note every place you stayed and how you did each of the portages. There's 67 portages altogether, and it's a good opportunity also to give feedback if you see any places on the trail where there might be some work that needs to be done. So only around 100 people have actually sent in their application. Probably another 100, I'm just guessing, may have thru-paddled and decided not to be recognized. So when you think about the Appalachian Trail and you compare it to that, it's a very small crowd, and there's a lot of room for other people to go on to discover it. These are just a few of the people that have thru-paddled. This is a family from France that have done the trail twice. The year I did it in 2015, and then the following summer. And Mallow was 3 the first time and 4 the second time. So he's the youngest person to have thru-paddled. And These are friends of mine, Justine and TK Kiernan. They did their thru-paddle in 2011 when I was doing the cancer fundraising paddle, and we finished on the same day. And this is their little dog, Moxie, a Yorkshire Terrier that weighs 4 pounds, and she was the first dog to thru-paddle. And this is my friend Peter McFarland, and for those of you that have already read Upwards, you would have heard a lot about him on Lake Champlain because he was my mentor for the upstream paddling and actually volunteered to go across Lake Champlain to make sure that I was all right. But he has just made trail history in June. He started May 14th and finished on June 10th. He paddled the trail in the other direction. He did it in 28 days in this canoe that he built himself, a cedar strip canoe. And that's the same number of days that it took him to go in the easier direction from west to east. He said he wanted bookends, and he wanted the two trips to be as similar as possible. And you'll see that I used wheels for a lot of my portaging. He didn't take any wheels. So all of his portaging was done by putting all his gear in one backpack, putting his canoe up over his head, and walking. Probably about 125 miles or so. Of course, most people that explore the trail only do sections, and of course I had to put a picture of my daughter Megan in there, so that's Megan when she met me in 2011. Are you having trouble hearing? I'll put this a little closer. And so anyway, she's joined me for short parts, and most people end up exploring the trail that way. And I do like to talk about these maps. They're just a really good resource, even if you just typically paddle in one area like the Rangeleys or Flagstaff Lake. They're waterproof, and they have all the information you want on camping, portaging, things to see along the way. And then on the back of the map is a really nice introduction to the history and the natural history and the geology of the area. And those maps are put out by the Northern Forest Canoe Trail Organization, which is the nonprofit in Vermont that stewards the trail. And they do more things than I can really talk about today, but they're really good camps in the summer for students ages 11 to 15. That program is called the Northern Forest Explorers. They're continually working to develop partnerships with communities and landowners. And some of the places that I camped on the trail would be a spot where a landowner might have just started out by letting one thru-paddler, one group camp on his property, and then decide that it was fun, and then gradually become more and more committed to supporting the trail, and then eventually might agree to allow NFCT to put in an official campsite. They have picnic tables and composting toilets and things like that. They are very much proponents of the Clean, Drain, Dry program to try to keep invasive plants from being spread, and animals too, from being spread from one watershed to the other. And I've already mentioned the maps. So I can't really tell my story without looking back to where it all began. And actually I have, when I did my book launch here, I showed a picture of my great-grandfather who had this shack that he built on Island Beach in New Jersey. So he's really the first one I know of in our family that seems to have had this bug that I got. He had it probably even a little bit more than me. I was born in New Jersey, so there I am fishing with my dad on the Jersey Shore when I was like 3. And then we just grew up camping together. We had 2 other families that we would go with all the time, and for as long as even a week or 2. And I'm the second one from the, I keep forgetting to use this, second one from the right, that's me right there. And the only person missing from the picture is my younger brother, who was 7 years younger. He was probably a baby. And there I am in my forestry career, which I did for 15 years. So that got me outdoors a lot. But my faith, and just coming from a family where we would spend all of our weekends together, we might be camping or hiking, or we might be going to a museum or going to the library. It was just a blessing that so many kids these days really don't have that. and it really shaped who I became as a person. And my family also was my support team as I started to do these longer and longer expeditions. So that's my mom. There's my mom right there. And my son Taylor, and myself and my dad on the 2015 trip. And that's at the Grand Falls hut of the Maine Hudson Trails. So they have 4 lodges all together in Maine. And 2 of them are right on the trail, one on Flagstaff Lake, and then this one is just beyond Grand Falls. And that's the one Mom didn't know was going to be in here. I just love that picture. So if you remember back to the map and where the arrows were, you would remember that the main miles of the Northern Forest Canoe Trail, which is about half of it, were the easier part because there weren't too many of those arrows that you would have to paddle upstream against. So in 2011, I did just Maine, and I actually put in it at the Umbega National Wildlife Refuge in New Hampshire, so I could be sure that I did all of our state. So that was them dropping me off. But on this longer trip, they met me 3 or 4 times with resupply boxes that I had packed ahead of time with food and things like fuel and batteries and toilet paper. And Mom took my dirty clothes every time, took them home and washed them. So I had 2 entire sets of what I needed. So that was invaluable. So these, Sharon Rinn mentioned Paddle for Hope. These are some pictures from that trip. I had a native watercraft hybrid kayak that weighed 48 pounds, and it had a seat that would come out that weighed an extra 8 or 9. So what I consider the boat itself was like mid-50s as far as pounds, and it was just too heavy for me to be able to carry when I had to do the carry portages. So I did know I needed a lighter boat in order to be able to do the whole thing. But that was a wonderful experience, and there's some people in the room here who, like Mal, who were big supporters of that effort.
Who was the little boy that was in it?
There was a ranger. Who was the little boy in the picture was the question. When you go into the Allagash doing this route, you end up going across Mud Pond Carry, which I'll talk about later, so you don't really meet any rangers or anything. So the ranger paddled up to my campsite the next morning and got me all registered for being up there. And then a few days later, his son was at Churchill Dam when I got there. So that's just one of my favorite pictures. You don't really have a whole lot of pictures of yourself on the trail when you're out there going solo. So there's just a real community of these thru paddles. You can probably tell from hearing me talk about them. You really develop very special friendships. In fact, there's a man named Mac Truax, he's in the book, and he is in the process of thru paddling right now for the 4th time. And I went up to Jackman yesterday to shuttle, to ride with them from Jackman to Stratton and bring his car back. And I felt like I'd known him for years, but it was the first time I'd ever met Mac face to face. And so these people, this is Katina Damon in the middle here. Oh, there she is. She wrote the Thru Paddler's Guide that we all rely on, but she also is just a good friend who would send me emails. She would write to me all of a sudden, think of some part of the trail that's going to be really challenging for me, and she might send me a 3-paragraph email with all her ideas and instructions and a little Google Map screenshot. This is Paul Hines, who Mom, Dad, and I met by Lobster Stream in 2008. He was thru paddling, and that was the first time I heard of the trail and knew that it existed. I just thought it was so cool. He was in this big canoe loaded with all this gear and was paddling 740 miles, and I was just in awe. This is Nicole Grahosky, who's the first woman that ever thru paddled, and she did it with a partner. So that I like to clarify that I'm not the first woman to do it, just the first to do it solo. This is Peter again here. So I used the maps like I talked about, and I also had a handheld GPS for navigation, and I would compare what I saw on the GPS map screen with the paper map, and that helped to guide me along the way. So I kind of committed to doing the trip late in the fall, early winter of 2014-15, and everything was frozen, so I had to find some other ways to get in shape. So Steve and Joe Lorick own the property behind our house, and they're very kind to let me do snowshoe trails there in the winter, so I did a lot of snowshoeing, and I just took advantage of every other chance to be active, swimming or getting out there and walking. And I also did a series of like upper body exercises with hand weights that really helped. I had a lot of the gear that I needed, but I did buy a new tent. And there we are right after I got it from Christmas. I didn't buy it, I actually got it as a Christmas present. So there it is set up in our living room. And I always have questions about the gear that I use. A lot of the cooking and kitchen and sleeping equipment is the same as you would use for backpacking. I had both a double-bladed and a single-bladed paddle with me, but I paddled almost exclusively with the kayak paddle. One of the most important pieces of gear other than the boat is the wheels. This does not seem to be working, but you can see where the wheels are there. And so there was, what I did with my GPS was I kept a log as I went along, so I know exactly according to my GPS how many miles I portaged, and that said 127. And out of that, all but 10 or 11 miles, I could put the boat on the wheels like you see up here. And it really wasn't much more difficult than just walking. All the gear would go in the boat. And I really liked my particular brand of wheels. A lot of thru-paddlers have had problems and their wheels have gotten messed up and they've had to replace them. So mine worked really well. This is my Spot satellite transponder, so it has a tracking feature, and friends and family that had the link to it could follow along and see exactly where I was every 10 minutes. So that was really reassuring, particularly to my parents. And you can see it has an SOS button, which I've never had to push, but if you ever did push it, it would bring in all the different kinds of help that were available. And I'm going to try doing something here because I think this is kind of cool. So this is what it looks like, and this is especially neat because this is the track for Mac, who's doing the trail with his friend Maggie. So, like down in the bottom left corner, that first little footprint was where I dropped them off yesterday at Flagstaff Lake, and you can see they camped for the night on an island about halfway through. So that would be what my family would be looking at, something like that, which is really neat. Oh, yeah, there we go. Water filter, I had to filter my water. And there's even a few rivers in Vermont and New Hampshire where you can't drink the water even if it's filtered because there's a lot of agricultural runoff, which was kind of a surprise to me because I'm used to trips up here where the water is always able to be drunk if you filter it. So this is my boat. Sharon mentioned that. I did get it in Kevlar, and the boat itself weighed 32 pounds. And when I would be doing a carry portage, I would have my paddles tied into it. It has this canoe seat that stays in there, and then I have a yoke, a wooden yoke with like a foam pad that my dad helped me build for portaging. So when all that was in there and I was actually carrying it, it was 38 pounds, which I could do for about half a mile. So my hopes for the adventure, you already know I wanted to try to write about it and share the trail. It also turned out to be a really good way for me to reflect on the journey and process what it meant to me. But I also knew that I wanted to take enough time while I was out there on the river to do photography, to write while I was in the moment. And that was something that was always kind of a constant push and pull, because you know you want to make a certain number of miles each day, but you also want to stop and enjoy the roses along the way. So I averaged about 14 miles a day, but it was really variable from maybe only 7 or 8 miles if I was struggling up a river, to as many as almost 30 if I was going downstream, like in the Allagash or on the St. John. And the 2 asterisks is just a designation that the NFCT puts behind your name if you manage to do the whole trail without taking any help. So that was my goal. And one thing I like to say, I'm just an ordinary person. I'm not really an expert whitewater paddler. And this expedition was such a stretch for me. And when I left and I started out, I really didn't have any idea whether I was going to be able to do the whole thing without any help. But I do feel like one thing that helped me was that I had this goal that I was just going to get through each day and not take any help if I didn't need to have it. I mean, I had a lot of trail angel help, but I didn't take any shuttles or have anybody move the boat for me. So I did manage to do that amazingly. So now we're going to go through the trail, and some of the parts are going to be really familiar to you, and then you'll see some remote places that might be new to you. That's Allagash Falls on the right. So the trail starts in New York. It goes through the Fulton chain of lakes, and then the Racket and Saranac rivers. And that takes you to Plattsburgh, New York, which is on Lake Champlain. It's about 150 miles. And I did have my father with me for the first week, and then we did the first 2 maps. I don't know if I said there are 13 altogether, but he did maps 1 and 2 with me. And he's not here today because he's off on a paddling adventure of his own right now this week. But he's trying to do the trail bit by bit, as much of it as he can. So we had a lot of flooding. The water levels were really high, and so that was one of our challenges. And then there was another one that you'll hear about in a minute. We saw those deer right away. They were on First Lake, and added a little bit of wildness to the trip, because that's really that section, the first section of the trail. There's a lot of other people out there. The Adirondacks is a beautiful place, but parts of it are also very, very busy. And by now you've kind of gotten the impression that there aren't too many people out there doing what I was doing. And I really only ended up meeting 3 other thru-paddlers actually on the river. And the first was this fellow on the left. We were on Racket Lake, and his name is John Mountner. He's from New Jersey. And we were on the end of our second day of paddling, and he got there in 1 day. So he said to me, it's going to be really nice seeing you along the route, and we'll get to be friends, and we can paddle together. And I thought, well, I don't know if I'm ever going to see you again or not, and I never did. We've kept in touch, but he finished, I think, I can't remember, maybe a week and a half before I did, or maybe even 2 weeks sooner. But it's really neat because there's trail journals all along the way, and you stop and you sign, which is one of the other safety features, because they can keep track of where you are or where you were if there was an accident. And so I could always see how much farther ahead he was getting. And in Vermont, he had a bear swim across in front of his canoe, so I was very jealous. I wanted to see the bear, and I never did. And this picture on the right is one of my favorite ones from the trip. This is Sydney and Margie Avison, mother and daughter, who were the only people that really were on the trail with me, because we leapfrogged each other all the way from Richford, Vermont, which is not far into Vermont, all the way to Jackman, Maine. We would continue to run into each other, and sometimes we camped together, and that was really nice. So there's Dad, and he bought also a Winona canoe, so his weighed about the same as mine. And he just loves to teach people. A few of you people in here know him, so you know he likes to explain things. And he had a lot of fun doing that. And really, we both did, because there's so many people that live along the trail and really aren't familiar with it. So it's nice to share that message. I have a picture of myself finishing each of the maps, because that was each of them was a big milestone, and I put the old one away and get the new one out. And this is what it looks like when I was carrying the boat. And a lot of those traditional carries were in the Adirondacks. And I don't usually read from my book, but I'm going to read a couple things today, I think. So this was one of the first times that I remember feeling really connected to the people that had been out there before, the native peoples and the early settlers. So this is me putting the boat up on my shoulders for the first time. I'd already been practicing, going around in the yard, but it wasn't really the same thing. Taking a deep breath, I reached for the gunnels and rolled the canoe up with a little bounce. Another wiggle or two got it perfectly balanced, and I was off. This choreography would get smoother as the weeks went by, but even this first time it worked. There was something about my firm grasp on the fort and the yoke settling solid on my shoulders that carried me back in time. As it has throughout the centuries, the trail ahead disappeared beneath the bow, shyly emerging a bit more with each careful step. The balance, the rhythm of the carry, look up to find the way, look down for sure footing, was repeated again and again in a dance that connected me to all those who had ever gone this way before. So that was neat. And then there's another long carry in Maine that you'll see. I mentioned it already, Mud Pond carry, but a lot of this type of experience was in the Adirondacks. So trail angels were a big part of the story, as they are for AT hikers. Some of you know Jamie and Paul Hartman at the top there. They have a cabin on Moose Lake Lake, and I stayed with them one night in 2011 and then twice on this trip. And that's allowed if you're trying to get the 2 asterisks. Somebody can come and pick you up and take you to their cabin for the night, as long as they bring you back to the same place. And so that's what I did. That's my Aunt Sue on the bottom. She paddled Moosehead Lake with me, which is about 20 miles of the trip, both times, which was neat. And I think I'll just tell the story of those 2 girls on the top right. We were on the Richardson Lakes, and that was the slide that I had at the very beginning of my talk. That's what it looks like. And one of the challenges when you're going through the Rangeley's is most of the camping is by reservation only. And I didn't have a reservation because it's really hard when you're through paddling. You don't really know where you're going to be. You don't have good phone service. So here I was on the Narrows between the 2 lakes, and I didn't have a reservation, and all the campsites so far have been full. So one of the girls was down by the canoe, and I paddled over there and I said, do you know whether there are very many other campsites ahead, because I haven't been able to find anything empty. And just at that time the storm had been approaching, all of a sudden there was some lightning, and she said, well, we think the campsites around the point are full also, but you can go and look, but if there's no room there, no worries, you can come back and camp with us. And so I did that. I just went real quickly to the point and I peeked, and you can usually see if campsites are full because you can see the bright color of the boat. And I could see boats that were power boats in this case moored outside where the campsite was. So then I scurried back to their site and they let me camp with them, and there really was like no room. It was a little tiny site and they were just so nice, and we kept in touch also. But that became the title for one of my chapters, No Worries. So a lot of my chapter titles came from things that happened during the trip. But I could stand here for an hour telling stories of people that helped, that let me store my boat on their property, or gave me a meal, or helped me with navigation and directions. So this is one of the things I learned early on in the trip: travel light, the lighter the better. And I like to put this slide, this message in here with this slide, because you can see I have a cooler in my boat there, and that's something I only did the first week while Dad was with me, and then no cooler after that. And here we are going into one of the locks. There's locks on the Saranac River, above and below Lower Saranac Lake, and it's really neat. So you paddle in there just like you would on the Erie Canal, and usually there's a lock tender there to operate the mechanism, but if there isn't, you have to do it yourself. So we had lock tenders, but it was still really fun.
Laurie,
Yes?
how long does it take them to raise or lower the lock?
And I was wondering how long it took for the water to go up or down, and I'm going to say maybe 5 minutes or less. It doesn't take very long. It's kind of neat. We just kind of hung out right near the wall there, and I kind of kept my hand there, and we just, went down. It was neat. So here's the other challenge that I had in New York that hopefully if any of you decide to go, you're not going to have this as well. But do you remember when the convicts escaped 3 years ago in New York from the Dannemora prison? Well, they escaped 2 weeks before I was going to leave on the trip. And, I'm a person of faith, so I believed that God was going to protect me and things would work out. And it was getting closer and closer, and they weren't caught. We didn't know where they were. but I was going to have Dad with me for the first week, so that was okay. So we set off, and we made it alive through that week. And so the end of map 2, where he was going to leave me, is a village called Saranac Lake in New York, 90 miles into the trail. And we got there that night, and we're signing in on one of those journals, and all of a sudden this huge parade of black SUVs and police cars went screaming by with the sirens and the lights. And it turns out to be the night that they killed the first convict. So that was, now there was only one. But on the other hand, they probably weren't in Mexico or anything if one of them had been right there in New York. So I had to decide, was I going to go on by myself the next day, or was I going to quit? And that was really, for me, the scariest moment of the trip, and the one time that I questioned whether I was going to quit. I thought maybe Mom was going to call up and say, "You just can't go, I'm going to die if you keep on going." Or some of you have heard this story before, but it's such a good one. Or I thought, I was pretty sure Dad was going to say, "Well, I'll just stay with you a little longer, or I'll at least drive my truck along and make sure you're okay." But no, he went home. So it was 2 more days before they caught the other guy. And those were 2 long days. And there was a lot of, even though I was in the Adirondacks in this particular section, it was rainy weather the second day, and there was just a lot of paddling and portaging on lonely rivers and lonely roads. And this is the one campsite that I had to do while they were still on the loose. And I did find this point on Union Falls Pond, which was recommended to me as a good campsite, so at least I felt fairly safe there. But that picture is always going to bring back those memories. So this is the put-in where I'm supposed to put in, and I walk down the river a ways, and it just looks really, really too much for me. I'll try to zoom in on some of this and come down here so you can see a little bit better. So I called Dave at St. Regis, and I'm going to walk down the road a little further and see if it gets a little bit better than this. So I didn't really do too many videos. I'm going to work on my video skills on my next trip, but that shows you what the flooding was like. And on the Saranac River, it really was, there were a lot of difficult spots. In that case, I walked 2 more miles and then came to a place where I could put in pretty safely. But you know, you can only do so much planning before a trip like this, and some of it you just have to play it by ear. You have to wait till you get to the area and talk to local people and see what the conditions are like. So now we're at Lake Champlain. We're going to go across the northwest corner of Lake Champlain. And here's Peter again in the bottom right. And there's also another thru-paddler named Dan Brown that went with us also. And he's also the one that did Dad's and my shuttle at the very beginning. So over and over again, you continue to have these connections with other people. But we did pretty well on Lake Champlain. We had the wind behind us. Dan got to feeling poorly, so he went home the second day, and Peter and I went on together to do the second part of it. And we paddled in rain like you would not believe. So here you have another one of my chapter titles, Once You're Wet, You're Wet. I said that to myself that day, and then there were probably 3 or 4 other instances where I was out there paddling in pouring rain, and I would always say, once you're wet, you're wet. And luckily I was going in the summer. I started on June 20th and finished on August 11th, so it was usually pretty warm. That's the bakery at Hero's Welcome on North Hero Island. And I like to tell people it's one of the first things that you learn before you're going on a trip like this as part of your preparations. You memorize where every good bakery and all the ice cream, all the restaurants are, and all of us usually stop at the same places. So then you're in Vermont, and you start on the Missisquoi River, which is 74 miles long. There's a picture of some of the challenges of the Missisquoi right there. But it's also really beautiful because it is a different type of landscape. And I was used to paddling in Maine, and the Adirondacks were very similar. But in Vermont, you had this more open look and these broad valleys with the mountains in the distance. It was really nice. But even the one river that was downstream, that's the top right picture, is called the Nulhegan, and it's just filled with beaver dams. So it's narrow, it's winding, and you've got to cross all these beaver dams, so it was just as slow as it would have been on one of the upstream rivers. So this would be the picture on the left, probably would be a place where I would be getting in and out of my boat. Usually I can manage to stay in the water, just walk the boat. It doesn't really draw very much water, and it's really slippery a lot of times, so it's actually good to have the boat. You can put both hands on it and walk. Something like this picture on the right, I probably would have gotten out on the shore and just portaged around the edge. This is the remains of a dam where there was a butter churning factory. I didn't know there were butter churning factories, but that's what the guidebook said. And a lot of the upstream paddling was quieter, and it looked like this, so you just had to hug the shore and try to stay to the inside of the curves, and you could make fairly good progress, surprisingly. Oh, and I was going to tell you, that was another chapter title, which I called Muddy, Monotonous, Marvelous. Because when you're going upstream, when you get to parts like that that are just muddy and monotonous, it's marvelous because you don't have rapids that you're trying to walk over. So this is fairly new. I put in this video of some beavers. So I saw beaver. I also saw muskrat and otter quite often.
They looked eager.
Eager.
Yeah.
This was one of my tough spots, other than the convicts. I guess I did give up in this particular spot. So I had been walking upstream through the Clyde River, which is after you get back from Quebec. And I actually was trying to make it to the bridge that I'm standing on later, taking this picture, and I just couldn't make it right below that last diagonal line. I couldn't go any farther, and the current was just too strong, and I felt like I was going to be swept off my feet. But luckily, I had just gotten to the area close to the road where there were people's houses, so there was a man who let me take out across his property, which was really nice. So there's another lesson I kind of alluded to already, learning to take a day at a time, and also learning to ask for favors and help. That got easier the longer I was out there. So here I am camped on the property of the Abbey restaurant, which happens to be right on a rail trail that we used to portage around some difficult rapids on the Missisquoi. And I just came right out and said, "Can I camp in your yard?" And they said yes, so that was nice. And it wasn't all camping. Some nights were luxurious. And this is Grey Gables Mansion in Richford, Vermont. So this is right before we got to Quebec. And this is the first place that Mom and Dad met me for a resupply. They're actually in that upper right picture there. And these people that own this B&B are very big trail proponents. They're very typical of the people that get very committed to the trail, and they even let people come and have breakfast there that aren't staying at their B&B. There's a park right across the street where it's a town park where you can camp for free. And if you just tell them you're going to be there for breakfast the next morning, they'll host you. So that's actually where I met Sydney and Margie. And they were really interesting because Sydney was working on the equivalent of her master's thesis for her degree in something called expeditionary studies. So she was getting a master's degree in doing trips like this from SUNY Plattsburgh. And she had been doing the trip with her boyfriend, and her boyfriend got hurt. And so her mother just dropped everything in like less than a day. She ran out and bought the clothes she needed or whatever, and she flew from California to do the rest of the trail to Sydney. So this is what it looks like going into Quebec. Up in Quebec, it's beautiful agricultural country, and that's one of my favorite pictures from the entire trip. But to go into Canada, you go through a regular border crossing station, but when you're ready to come back again, you have gone to the end of the Missisquoi River, then you've gone across something called the Grand Portage, which takes you up like 800 feet into this really like windswept hilltop with this big farm. It's really beautiful. And then you drop way down to a lake called Lake Memphremagog, and that lake straddles the border. So when you come back into the U.S., you're actually paddling down this lake, and when you get to the international border, there's some buoys there, but there's no way to check in. So you go another 5 or 6 miles to this marina, and this is a video phone, and you just hold up your passport, and you call them, and they ask you the same kind of questions they would ask at a border crossing station, and if they're happy with you, then you get to go ahead. And I think the only question they asked me was whether I was bringing anything back that I had purchased in Canada. And so the answer was no. That's just one of the neat little sights I saw in Quebec. It's a circular barn, and it's a shaker design that's built that way so that the devil doesn't have any corners that they can hide. So back in Vermont, this is one of the interesting wetlands. There's several along the trail, but this one's just called the Fen, and it's on the Clyde River. And it has a channel, I suppose, but it's really hard to follow, so it's more like a maze, and you just look at the direction that the underwater plants are flowing to figure out which way to go. And I think I have time to read one more little section. So I was actually with Sydney and Margie again at this point. And we had, I'll go ahead and show you this one. We had camped the night before at this place. This is another trail supporter, Bill and Pat, and they're so committed to the trail that they decided to build a farm stand, and they've named it the NFCT Farm Stand. And so you can get homemade ice cream there, and also salad greens and other produce. We were kind of early in the season, so we just got some salad greens, but later in the year they'd have other kinds of vegetables, and that's something obviously you'd be really craving when you're out there on the trail. So here I am talking about what it was like to start out the next morning on the Fen. The beauty of the Fen in the gentle light of morning was doubled, reflected back in the perfect stillness of the water. An abundance of glossy black red-winged blackbirds moved among the tall grasses, their perches ever-changing. Above was pure blue sky. Near shore, shadows stretched along across the subtle reds and greens of a vast field of lily pads. I looked over to Sydney paddling, stern as always, and Margie just touching her paddle to the water. And there they were again, mirrored in the river. We were delighted with the Fen so far. As the sun intensified, though, the ephemeral beauty of early morning began to slip away. We passed large stands of dead trees, home to nesting ospreys. At first, we had little difficulty following the channel among the delicate pink swamp roses and yellow water lilies. Watching the undulating underwater plants flowing backwards, pulled by the current, confirmed that we were truly following the main channel upstream. Several miles passed before the river, now much narrower, began to split and branch. High water further confused things in this bog that was constantly reinventing itself. Our maps, my GPS, and the companion's advice to stay to the left all helped, but soon we found ourselves confused again and again. Under the sun's ruthless glare, we paddled vigorously up a likely channel, only to round a bend and discover a dead end choked with vegetation. Meanwhile, tantalizingly close, were glimpses of bright blue water on the far side of a tangle of green. Reflecting back, though, I think I would have been disappointed if we hadn't gotten at least a little bit lost. And always, after some hot and scratchy bushwhacking or backtracking, we would go forward again.
Laurie,
Yes.
did you ever think you might want to get one of those flying cameras, a drone? Yeah,
I think I would love to have a drone.
yeah. I mean, a situation like that, to go up 300 feet, see where you're at would be.
Yeah, that would be really good.
Yeah.
As it is, I wanted a new camera, so I have a new camera for my trip this summer. It magnifies to 25x, and I bought a tripod, so hopefully I can do a little bit better with my videoing. But maybe the drone will be the next step. So this is kind of neat. So you get to the end of the Clyde River, which is of course really the beginning because you're going upstream. And it comes out from Island Pond, which is its source underneath this hotel. So you have to paddle. We had to paddle under a lot of low things like that in the picture looks like you might not fit. But we always did, or usually did. I don't have a lot of slides in here about New Hampshire. There's 2 rivers, the Upper Ammonoosuc and the Androscoggin, and about 40 miles total paddling all upstream. And one little neat story from New Hampshire is, what did I do with my pointer? Is this picture of stealth camping here. So stealth camping would be someplace where there isn't really a regular campsite. You just have to find a place. And I was on the Upper Ammonoosuc, and it had been looking like those banks that you see up there. It was all mud and brush and really no place at all to camp. And all of a sudden I came around a curve, and I looked up to the left, and there was a high bluff, much higher than the shore had been at all, and an open stand of pines up there. It looked just like a campsite on the Allagash. It was beautiful. So I climbed up there, and when I'm stealth camping like this, I like to be sure there's no road access, that you can't see me from the water, and so I carried my boat up and just get everything out of sight, but it was beautiful. And that was one of the places where the next morning I think I stayed pretty long in camp, enjoying it. So then I was on the Androscoggin, and I was almost to Maine. And that was a real psychological booster for me because I had already paddled everything in Maine, or all but a couple little streams. And so I knew what the water was going to look like, and there wasn't much upstream left. And so I was pretty excited. And everybody that thru-paddles agrees that Maine is sort of the reward for a lot of the struggles that have gone before. And there is Long Falls, just past Flagstaff Lake, which you portage around. People ask me, you didn't paddle down that, did you? No. And this is the Moose River on the bottom, and a picture of me about to do Chase Rapids in the Allagash. So just to go quickly through the main route, you start in the Rangeley Lakes, which is Magog, the Richardsons, Moose Lick, McGuntick, and Rangeley. Then you follow the Dead River over to Flagstaff Lake and out the other side. That takes you over to Grand Falls, and then you go up through Spencer and Little Spencer streams, which was the one little part that I hadn't paddled before because I'd hurt my back and I kind of portaged around that. So that was really special when I got there. That takes you into the Moose River, and then you go across the Moose River and its lakes to Moosehead Lake. And then you can go either across northeast or northwest carries at the top of Moosehead into the west branch of the Penobscot. And then you go across Chesuncook Lake through Mud Pond Carry and into the Allagash. You do all of the Allagash, and then the last 30 miles is on the St. John. So this is near the beginning, right after Magog Lake. You portage up along the Rapid River, and this is where Louise Dickinson Rich lived and had Forest Lodge. So that's kind of cool. There's 34 babies in this family. Flagstaff Lake, I like to tell people, is just a great place to go if you want to do a combination of paddling and hiking, because the Appalachian Trail runs right along the Bigelow Range, and this is as close as the Northern Forest Canoe Trail gets to the Appalachian Trail. And I was with Sydney and Margie again at that point. There's Grand Falls. It's 40 feet high, and it's the highest waterfall on the trail. You don't paddle over that either. And this is an example of a good place where there's been a developing partnership. When I went through in 2011, the portage around it was really confusing. When I went back in 2015, they had partnered with Maine Hudson Trails and used their trails and their dock, and it was a whole lot easier. So this is the 2 little streams that I skipped in 2011. So I've been telling people I've paddled all the way across Maine except for these 7 miles. So it was really special to me to be able to go back and tackle them in 2015. And we spent that night at the Grand Falls Hut. There's Mom and Taylor again. And then Taylor gave me a big hug and went back to Virginia. And I started up these 2 streams. And it wasn't as bad as what I'd been dreading. I was able to paddle some. I got in and out of my boat 24 times in the first 4 miles. And I also saw my first moose of this trip on Little Spencer Stream, which was really cool. But that brings you into Spencer Lake. And Spencer Lake and Fish Pond, which is right above it, are just below Jackman. And if you or anybody in your family is into going someplace pretty remote and camping where there aren't too many other people, there are free campgrounds on both of these lakes. And you just have to make a reservation ahead of time. And it's a wonderful place to go. I went with Dad and the Blomquists and the Bouches and another friend that I met at the Maine Canoe Symposium and camped on Fish Pond last summer. And it was just wonderful. There's 6 sites in there, I think, and we were the only people there the whole time. So there's history everywhere along the trail. I tried to bring it into my book and share it with you, history and the natural history. And this is the site of a World War II prisoner of war camp that you portage right by when you're going over to the Moose River. There's a look, other than Chase Rapids in the St. John, which I don't have any pictures of because I dropped my camera in the water last morning. Other than those 2 bodies of water, this would have been probably about the most difficult rapids that I actually paddled downstream. I portaged around anything that was any more difficult just to make sure I would stay in one piece. We had a blue moon, so this is the only rest day I took on July 31st. We're at Moosehead Lake, and that's Kineo on the left there. And so 52 days paddling and 1 day resting. This is my craziest weather day. This was a couple of days later on Bagog Lake, right before I did Mud Pond Carry. And I had all those types of weather in 1 day. And when I got to my campsite, the wind was blowing very strongly, and I put the pulled the canoe up on the beach, and I started carrying all my gear up to the campsite. And I just had the last arm load in my arms, and I heard this strange noise, and I turned around, and my boat had blown right off the beach and into the water, and was like being carried sideways. I just dropped everything. I ran as fast as I could, like thigh deep in the water, and just grabbed it. So that would have been interesting if it would have gotten.
Did you have a problem with the wind while you were paddling? Like you had a lot of free time. Did the wind blow you around quite a bit?
I did, and the question was if I had problems with the wind while I was paddling. I got really lucky in that I was never windbound for a whole day. We did have a day in the Adirondacks, Dad and I, when we went out onto Long Lake, and we only had gone maybe half a mile, and we couldn't control our boats at all. We just pulled right to shore, and luckily there was a lean-to there. But this day was really interesting. This is coming out of the West Branch right before you're going to get to Umbagog. It's just so hard to get a picture that shows what the whitecaps are like. But I kept on going out into the lake, and I needed to go. There's a big island called Giro, I never know how to pronounce it, a big island in the lake. And you have to go kind of above it, between the island and the shore. And the wind was behind me, so you would think that you could just paddle with the wind's help. It was so strong, it just kept turning the boat sideways. But I was kind of scooting along. This was like a couple hours before my boat blew off the beach. It was just pushing me along in the direction I wanted to go. I wasn't too far from shore, so I just kind of sat there. It was kind of funny. And the scariest time was on Lake Champlain. Before I met Peter and Dan, I had to cross Cumberland Bay, which was like 2 miles across, and I was meeting them at the ferry terminal. And it actually ended up being that the wind was blowing up into that bay, broadside to my boat. And I ended up having to do that 2 miles without them there to watch me. There was not another boat on the water, except there was like a police boat that had been some kind of patrol boat right outside the marina. So I felt like they probably had seen me start out. But I was just saying the 23rd Psalm to myself over and over again. So this is Mud Pond Carry. It's 1.8 miles to get into the Allagash. And this is the way Thoreau and the native peoples and lots of other people who went into the Allagash. It's always been really wet, but as people and animals, because there used to be pack animals sometimes that would carry people's gear 100 or 150 years ago, all that traffic just has worn this stream, and so you really walk the whole way, or almost the whole way, in water that can be as high as like halfway between your ankles and your knees. And there's a lot of trees down over it. It's really slippery, very treacherous. So I've done it twice. I'm not planning on doing it again. And so now we're just about at the end. The Allagash was nice. I had a set ending date for meeting Mom and Dad, and so I could go really slowly. I did set up camp one day at 10:30 in the morning. I saw 14 moose altogether. I saw moose, deer, mink, fox, raccoon, squirrels and chipmunks, and then I told you about the otter, the beaver, and the mink. And muskrat. And what else? And a snake, yes. Those were the mammals. And yeah, and I saw a new species of turtle on the Missisquoi called the map turtle in the National Wildlife Refuge. It looks a lot like a painted turtle, but there's no red on it. It has that same kind of like yellow design on its head, and it looks like contour lines on a map, and that's how it got its name. Just the skies are beautiful. A lot of history up there, obviously. For some reason, I don't have a picture of the locomotives in the slideshow, but on Eagle Lake, there's 2 full-size locomotives that are remnants of a railroad that ran 13 miles back in the late 20s and early 30s. And when they left, they just abandoned the locomotives.
Where are those stoves from?
It doesn't really tell you. This is a museum. It's at Churchill Dam, right before Chase Rapids, and you can drive into it and look at it, but it's one of those sort of homegrown, homemade museums, and some of the things are labeled with their history and some aren't. So I don't know. There's a lot of neat old photographs, and it's really cool to look at a photograph and see that it's a village that might have had like a little store, maybe a little school and everything, and you read the name, and now it's nothing more than just a name on one of the campsites in the Allagash. So it's like you know the name, but you never knew what used to be there. My last video. So as the trip went on, I tried more and more to just make sure I didn't disturb the wildlife. But this guy didn't seem to care. He knew I was there. And he never moved. I just powered right by him. So here I am at the end of my last portage, and it was definitely bittersweet. It was going to be nice to get home, but also I just had the most amazing adventure. I was in the best shape of my life at 53, and those last couple nights of camping out on the lower part of the Allagash were kind of sad. But this is the portage around Allagash Falls, that falls that was in that 3-part picture. And I can remember, like, on the first couple trips on the Allagash, what a big deal this portage seemed to be, like this almost insurmountable obstacle. And it took me like an hour and 15 minutes to portage it and eat my lunch and spend some time taking pictures. So I knew I was definitely in better shape, and I had a lighter boat. So there are my dates. There I am coming into Fort Kent at the end. And Dad and Mom met me in Allagash Village, so Dad did the last day's paddle with me. Like I said, we don't have any pictures other than this one. He ran. I kind of dawdled out there while he ran up to the truck and got his phone so he could come back and take a picture. And we've been paddling in rain all day long. I was frozen, and the pictures of me standing by the kiosk at the end, I look like I'm in agony, so I don't ever put that one in here. So that's my book, and writing the book was just such a good way for me to reflect on what the trip meant to me. And like I said, I tried to write the kind of book I like to read. I read a lot of this kind of genre, and I like a mix of the people you meet and the things you see along the way, and a little bit of history, a little bit of natural history. So that's what I tried to do. But there ended up being more of myself in the story, my background and my faith, than what I really thought I was going to end up writing. And those were the parts that I wrote and rewrote 4 or 5 different times. I published cooperatively through Maine Authors Publishing up in Thomaston, and that's introduced me to a community of authors, which has been really neat. I've got people now that I can bounce ideas off of. We go to events together, and that's been really, really fun. So thanks for sharing my journey. I hope I didn't keep you too long, but it's so fun to talk about it.